So, hi, this is awesome. I've got Sheri Hickman here, which is super cool. Thanks, big love to Linda for setting that up. And I was just going to say, Linda, or sorry, Sheri, the reason I'm reaching out is, I had a fairly profound experience about 5 years ago when I first was introduced to what I was introduced to as the three principles. And,
Right.
martial arts guy, for me, going to the source of something is critical. Uh,
Yes.
so the reason I've been reaching out to Linda, and I don't know if you've heard, we've got David Banks coming on. We're gonna have.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I haven't talked to him in years since he was a little boy, really,
Oh, really?
teenager. Uh,
Oh, well,
yeah.
maybe we can coordinate it, and you can join us as well. Um, so I don't have an agenda when I do these calls or anything, and ours is quite spontaneous. So can I just start off with what do you remember? Tell me about your first experience. Tell me about a little bit about when you met Sid. How does your story fold into this?
Well, I came to the island in 1971, and I would call myself a hippie at that time. I wanted my marriage broken up. I had 3 kids, and I wanted to get back to the land, and that's a lot of people that moved here wanted to live a more rural life, and I have 5 acres here now, so I kind of did that. But of course, then I found out I'm a single woman with 3 kids and trying to raise all your own chickens and do all this stuff by yourself, and finding a place to rent over here as well
Right.
was really difficult. So I just rented a place in town, well, in the village, and I got a job at the school. And then during that time, I met my husband, well, my new husband. So at that time was just a guy that I met, and we liked each other. And some people that were kind of friends of his family that we were close to, but they were like parents, say,
Right.
the couple. And we'd known them quite well for like a year, or I had for about a year. And they were the kind of people that kind of bickered and argued and were a little bit negative, maybe, and that kind of thing at some of the time. And they took us for a picnic.
Oh gosh.
Happy, and they were getting along, and
Sherry, hold on 1 second. We lost you there.
positive,
You were
and
talking.
their face.
Oops. Oh goodness. Sherry, you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I lost that
Can you
whole.
hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with our connection here. We sort of got interrupted when you said that you were looking to rent a place in the
Yeah.
village, and I believe you said you found something with some people that were a little bit older, sort of a parent's age.
Yeah, we were just friends of my husband, the fellow who became my husband later. When I
Right.
met him, we're friends of his family. So can you pick me up now? Because it might be my side, and I could move to another
I've,
room and see.
I've got you now, Sherry. Everything is crisp and clean. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we went, these people tended to be a little bit bickering and a little bit negative, and some of the time, like you never knew what to expect. They were a little bit sarcastic, but some things about them that bothered me a bit, being judgy. Um, we went for this picnic with them one day, and this must have been about 1974, I think, the summer of 74, time around that I could never pinpoint exactly. And they were different. They were more positive. It's almost like their faces were shiny. Like they looked amazing. They looked younger. And after, I couldn't help but, because it was such a big change, and I'm outspoken sometimes. So I said, "You guys seem so much happier and so much different. And what's going on with you? Or on medication or something?" And they said, "Well, we've been going and listening to this Enlightened Man." And I thought, oh, yeah, well, and I've never been somebody in a search. I grew up in the United Church, and I sort of was humble about everything. And I thought I had my own beliefs and I didn't need any help with anything. So I haven't been one of the people that was reading a lot of these books, and I still do. And trying to find myself or something. I just wasn't, I was just happy living my life a little bit, but with lots of problems. But anyway, I was so amazed by that change in them. They said, you should come along, you should come. And I said, I don't like things like that and stuff. And they said, no, come with us, come to this meeting we're going on Wednesday or whatever it was. So I brought a big bag of knitting because I thought, well, this is going to be really boring and I'll have to sit there and have something to do while these guys go on about something.
Right.
And so I get into this, of course, it's down this long driveway, just like Linda describes in her books, this tiny cottage on this, these wonderful smiler, and Sid's mother-in-law, Mary, she was just like an angel. And they had you to come and make you tea or whatever. And I sat on the end of this couch all stiff, and I had a bag of knitting by my feet and ready to go. And Sid came in and said hi to everybody, and he sat down by the fireplace. And I guess there were 7 or 8 people there with the 2 that I went with. So we were 3 of them. And I don't even remember who else was there now. But we just sat down, and he had this very serene look to his face, and just something about him that you just had to stare at him. And in this lovely Scottish brogue kind of accent, he just started to talk. And it wasn't like he had notes he was reading or a planned speech like I would think you would have, like if you did a sermon in a church.
Right.
He just started to talk. Can you hear me?
I can. You're good. Yeah.
Still?
Nope. Now you're a little.
Yeah. And okay.
Now you're gone again.
I'll move out to this. Yeah, I'm going to move out to this other room and see if it's me.
Okay.
Just a sec here.
It does look like
this is such a nice.
Your signal just got a little bit stronger there, Sheri.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll go out, and you'll see half of my messy house out here.
That's okay.
I'll sit out at the table here. Is this better now?
It seems to be, yes. Yeah.
That's a better signal. Yeah, so anyways, Sid just started talking, nothing rehearsed, and it was just almost the first or second thing he said, and I felt like he was looking right at me. I was the new person there. And he said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself.
Right.
And that was the first thing that kind of hit me somewhere in my soul, that I have always been kind of tense about things and worry about things, and my whole life I was like that. And it just sounded like I felt like he could see it right into my mind or something, and that it was me he was talking to. And of course, that's kind of how it can hit you sometimes. But it was such a huge thing, and I just sat there mesmerized by everything else he said that night. He talked a lot about insecurity and security and fear that first night. And when I came home, I just said to my husband, like, you need to come and listen. Of course, he thought, oh, blah, that's not my kind of thing, And he didn't come for a while, but I kept going. And every week I'd go down to this little house to Sid's, and eventually more and more people it was getting bigger and bigger. And then we headed on into renting halls and things like that I would go. And then my husband eventually did come. But that was how I first met Sid.
So you weren't looking for anything?
I wasn't looking for anything, but I saw a huge change in this other couple, who, by the way, didn't stick with it. They came a few more times after that, and then they didn't go anymore. But they're the pathway that took me there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So how did that first how did that first night or that first experience manifest itself in your life? Like, did you see a change that was sudden, or was it organic over time? How did you embody that? Where did it go from there?
Yeah, when I really noticed it, and in those games we used to call things games, like the games people play now every night and every day now, the old song. And some people call them trips, or just their habits. They're things that you do that you hardly notice you do that make your life harder a lot of the time.
Right.
I found out. But so it was sort of like that. I had bought this acres up here before I met my husband, but I didn't have a house or anything on it. So luckily I got this guy that was a carpenter. And and so we were living in a little tiny travel trailer, and we had a little shack that we had some of the kids in and all of this, it was a real hippiedom. And one of the first really big times that stand out for me that I noticed a change, and it was only probably after I'd been to see Sid 3 times, like once a week for 3 weeks or something. I used to do this thing. Well, I didn't realize I did this thing, but as an example, I would start a fight or an argument. Maybe I was having a cranky day. I don't know why I would do something like that, but I would do this. And then I would get him upset and going, and then I would say something and walk out and slam the door and walk away.
Right.
And this is something my mom did. Like, when I realized it later, my mom used to do this. And so this one time I do this whole thing, and I walk away, and I start walking up Mount Maxwell, like crying, and I'm all mad at him, which he hasn't really done anything. But
Right.
and it was just like an out-of-body experience where I suddenly was above myself, and I saw myself walking along this road, stamping my feet like a little 2-year-old stupid kid, like as this hilarious, like I'm in the middle of being mad and upset, and I look down and I see this absolutely hilarious person, like a situation that is something that she created totally herself and had nothing to do with this wonderful man.
Right.
And I just turned around and I walked back, and I came in the trailer, and I said, and he was cooking breakfast or something for us, probably doing something really nice. And I
Right.
and I just,
Yeah.
the poor guy. And I just walked in and said, I didn't just come in and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I said, I just totally realized I do this to you all the time, don't I? And that this is just a habit from my past, and I don't have to do this anymore, and I'm not going to do this anymore. And I'm just sorry for how this has been so hard on a person I love. That was a really big, my first, like, I wasn't going along thinking this is going to really change me and my life's going to be different and I'm going to learn things.
Right.
It just happened that way. I think if you search really hard, you don't find it, because it's really in yourself. And that's what Sid always told us. The truth is in you.
Right.
You don't have to look outside, but sometimes you need that little key to get you there,
I think that's very true. I spent a lot of I'm 50, and I spent probably a good 30 years, almost 35 years searching, looking for, it started for me in martial arts and reading the Tao Te Ching. And so I was looking, and over the past 10 years, I stopped looking, and it wasn't until I stopped trying that it fell into my lap, right? But I love what that you said, that Sid would say it's in yourself. What do you remember as being Sid's? I don't want to say it most important, but what did he talk about the most? Like what at that time, so 1974, 75, those years, what was he talking about the most?
Well, he would talk about God, and later he changed that terminology, I think, for other reasons, because he was working in universities and stuff. But at that time with us, he was free to say, and it was very close after his experience, and he would talk about his experience and how that happened sometimes. And apparently he had different stories for it to different people, so I'm not sure. But he would say things like, God is the energy of all things.
Right.
So God, you can go in the forest and you're God. You're part of God because you are God.
Right.
God is in you and God is in all things. And that really, really sunk in with me, and it really hit me somewhere that you can't explain these things, right? It's
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
he'll say something because your mind wants to explain it, but
Right.
he'll say something and it's just like, oh, I know that. It's like it clicked in me, like I know that. So I knew what things were true because my insides somewhere said, that's it. And one time he did that. One time we were in a big meeting with, I think it was in the hall. We used to rent a hall at a resort here on St. Mary's Lake. It was really quite nice. And we'd have our meeting there once a week. And he was going on, and his voice would get quieter sometimes and softer and quieter and this brogue, but you wouldn't feel sleepy. You would just feel hypnotized, kind of.
Right.
Everyone kept very quiet because you wanted to hear what he was saying. So you were really listening, paying attention. And so he was going on like this, and he was talking about change, how it's within you and you can change and all this stuff. And he said, you know, you don't know what effect might have on someone else. You might say something that's a truth that someone else will hear that you don't even know you said.
Right.
And you might hear a truth in the most unlikely place from the person that's sitting on the corner begging for money.
Right.
He might say something that for you, it triggers something.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know, people worry so much about changing, like the ego worries so much about making a change in your life or changing anything about the way you do things and the way you are and the way you look. But he said, you know, and people try to make change sometimes. They try really hard because they want this, they want to have this. But he said, change can happen just like that. And he went like that with his finger and this loud snap, and everybody was like in this hypnotic state almost. And then he snapped his finger right in front of the microphone. And I just remember it was a huge moment for me because it was just like, boing! It's that easy. It's not hard. You don't have to keep trying and traveling the world. You don't have to sit and stare at your belly button 10 hours a day trying to find it. It's
Right.
life. It's right all around you, you know, and that's true. Change can happen like that. And after listening to Sid for quite a few years, and then we went he kept saying, don't look at me, because that's what happened with Christianity. People started to worship outside of themselves, worshiping Jesus, worshiping God, or whatever your religion is. And they weren't looking within, they're looking without. So he said, I don't want this huge crowd of followers following me and sitting here listening to me forever. Once you've got something, or once you got it, you have to realize you have it and go on with your life.
That's something that struck me. I can't remember where that is, where I caught that from, but the idea that once you hear something, that tap is open. You can't close that tap again, but you also can't do more to make it happen faster. Like,
No, you can't push it.
It's I think it might have been in, oh gosh, no, is it Linda who writes about Sid, asking everyone to leave the island, and not out of anger, but go ahead and live your life.
Yeah.
I wonder, are you still involved at all in the community these days?
No, I went to university. Well, my youngest child, when she was in high school, or like her grad year, I started at UVic. I had worked at the school all those years teaching art, but I didn't have a teaching degree.
Right.
I had my kids young, and I always wanted to get a degree. And Sid had always been saying to me, and I think many things that he did say, like he would privately talk to me sometimes because I was working in the school.
Yeah.
And he would tell me what a great opportunity that was to pass on to the children and work with the children and the teachers and change the ideas in the school. And I would say to him, but Sid, I'm not a person that can go and like preach. Like there's people like Elsie and some people and that could speak really well.
Right.
And I said, that's not me. Like, I can't do that. And he said, no. He said, people won't always believe what you say, but they'll always believe what you do.
Right.
And it's what you do and how you interact with the children and how you teach them this, to believe in themselves and this positive attitude. Like, it's not something you have to go out and preach about, which
Right.
was a big relief to me because
Right. Pressure's off.
yeah. So the one thing I really, really wanted to do was to work with people, with children that had needs and that kind of thing. So I went to university and I got a Bachelor of Social Work.
Right.
And when I was working with families that were troubled and their children had been removed and they had drug issues and all kinds of things like that, I could always remember Sid snapping his finger like that and saying, that's how quick something can change. And so I always knew those people still had, no matter how bad things looked on the outside, they had that truth inside of them and that link in there if they could connect to it. And I always believed in them. And I really did help a lot of families and make change for families and children. So that was the way I think that I manifested it, rather than to be going out and talking to people about the actual SID experience.
Well, it sounds like you went out and you lived it.
I went out and I lived it, yeah. And I did that for 13 years. I did social work and in child protection for the government. So that's where you really see the people that need someone that believes in them.
Kudos to you. Yeah, absolutely. How long were you involved with Sid? That
Well,
didn't quite right, but
okay, well, when Sid was saying that about so many people were moving to Saltspring who'd never been here
yes,
before.
yes, yes, yes.
I mean, Elsie and Ken moved here from Nanaimo, all of these people, Chip and Chan. So he just was saying to more and more people, and then he had a smaller group that was sort of his support system that could actually afford to go with him and travel with him and do stuff with him.
Right.
And he was going off then more to the cities and then to the United States and all of those things. But the weirdest thing is, he would turn up I would be at the University of Victoria and I'd be walking down a little street in Oak Bay one day, and Sid would kind of come out of a door opening or something and start talking to me and finding out what I was doing and how I was doing, and usually have some little book, a new little book he'd written or something he would give me. And when I was doing social work in Nanaimo, I came out the door one day after work and he was standing out there. And we had a long talk and he asked me what books I'd seen that were the most recent things that had come out of his. And
Right.
the next day, I came to work and there was a book he had left there for me at the counter. The secretary said, "Oh, somebody dropped this off for you." And so we would always sort of see him and run into him and that kind of thing. But I hadn't gone to any more of his talks or anything for quite a few years after the 1980s, the mid 1980s, I think.
Oh, so you were I don't know what the right word is. I mean, because it's not follower or groupie or whatever. But so you were in say regular contact with him through meetings for about 10 years then?
Yeah, I can't remember how long the meetings even went on myself, but Linda has all those dates down pretty well, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't even there. She wasn't at them, but yeah, so I went as long as they were having the meetings here on the island, and
Oh, I see.
right through. I went to some in Vancouver when he had like at Van Dusen Gardens. He spoke
Right.
there, different things like that. I went to some of them. I went to Seabeck, which was in the United States, with a beautiful spot there, and some of those things. But after that, I was pretty busy, and yeah. And then he sort of moved off and was doing other things. And I just felt like he kept saying, not to me particularly, but to the crowds of people, he said, "You don't have to come and live on this island. You don't have to come and worship me, because
Right.
it's in you. Go and live your lives."
Right.
And he would tell us, of course, when you're in your hippie thing, you had a certain way of dressing, and you're big guys with the big beards and long hair and everything, and you wanted to be different than your parents' generation that you felt had made a mess of the world and had war,
Right.
did all that stuff, and the Vietnamese War was on then, and so and of course lots of people had, their kids were named, Rainbow and Daffodil and Sunflower and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I remember one night he said, you don't have to be different. You don't have to go and live in teepees. And he said, you don't have to name your children Rainbow and all that. He said, think about that. Is that a kind thing to do, to name your children Daffodil and Rainbow? These are your children, and they have to go out in the world with other people and kids at school and get teased because they have these weird names. Why do that? Why not? It's okay to go along with how society is being at that time. It makes less ripples in your life.
Right.
And you're not making any kind of statement anyway. What are you doing? You're just making your life harder, So a lot of people were kind of miffed when he said that, because it really applied to some very close followers of his that went out, they renamed their children.
Really?
Some of them they gave them a more ordinary name. And so suddenly here you saw this group. It was pretty amazing, because first the group was, and Sid himself, he'd wear the more hippie-like clothes and the longer hair and the beard. And all the people were like that. And then gradually all these same people were getting more and more fitting in with general society and cutting their hair. All these guys were cutting their hair and their beards were going. My husband too. And a lot of us were living together, and suddenly all of us were getting married and having weddings and actually getting married. And he was saying, just join society, and that's where you make a change, is when you're a part of it.
I think that's simply profound, that you know, that making a change from within yourself, but also enabling change from within society, that you don't have to be separate from. So would you say it's fair to say that Sid celebrated life, like his time on the planet, our time in form, was important to Sid? The time between we're born and when we die had value and meaning.
Yeah. Well, definitely he did. And I think though once he had this experience, he dedicated his life very completely to that and to sharing that. He just felt so strongly that he was supposed to share it, that he had to share it. And I think that took time away from his family. And he took time away from him being able to give his wife a normal sort of life that she might have wanted or liked. She went everywhere with him, and there was some resentment with the kids over that and things too, So I think it made it really hard, and I think he had a lot of sacrifices because of that. But he was a really positive guy most of the time, but he could get mad, and he certainly could judge people if he really thought, because he could see so clearly. Often I felt like he could see these games we were playing so clearly, but he didn't just point them out to us, because he knew you had to find that from within and by hearing things.
So how was it? Like, can you walk me through a session at Sid's house? What does that look like?
Yeah, so back at Sid's, usually he'd sit in front of the fireplace. They had big overstuffed couch and furniture. It was really his mother-in-law's house, and they were living there, and it was meant to be more like a cabin. It had 2 buildings on the property, so I think the kids might have slept in the other sort of smaller building. I'm not sure or the mother-in-law did, or something like that. So it was very unpretentious. He always would have different kinds of cars and trucks that were kind of wrecky, but they would fit whatever stage he was in. He progressed from this, he would go from his earlier days of maybe just the flannel shirt or something, and then he started to wear the white shirts that looked more like an Enlightened Man. And then he had, I think Linda made him a whole suit that was the white shirt and the white pants and everything. And then it would just depend what stage everything was going through. He would sort of seem to have a vehicle that matched it somehow. And he would have an outfit, like he would have a hat.
So okay, well, just before we come back to what it was like in one of his sessions, what was he driving while he was wearing the white pants, or the white pants and the flowing top?
Really good at that. I'll have to ask, because Bill, Linda's husband, he can remember all the different makes of his cars and stuff. So I'll ask him and I'll send that to you sometime,
Yeah,
because
that'd be cool.
I was always, and at one time when Chip came and these other guys came and they decided they would have a construction company, although I think none of them had really done construction or much before, and it was called Seagull Construction. And they were all downtown one day. We were down there, and so talking to them and stuff, and Sid was standing talking, and this seagull pooped on his head. And Sid thought this was so funny. I mean, he laughed and laughed, and he thought, oh, the seagulls are mad, at you guys and your construction. So maybe you better not use their name.
Oh, that's very funny.
But he had a really good sense of humor. And I mean, he could also get annoyed and get angry.
Right.
He had both of those parts to his personality. So,
What was it like when you got ticked off?
well, I think I was there the night that, I'm just gonna try to turn my phone off here or something.
Yeah.
I think I was there the night that he got mad at Linda, and
Yeah.
I didn't even remember it the way that she's told me, because I wasn't paying enough attention, I don't think, because they kind of went out, like Sid tried to cover it up a bit by going out the back door.
Right.
But I just remember that what I felt was like a real, when you're feeling kind of mellowed out and I guess in a higher state of consciousness when you're listening to Sid,
Right.
and something heavy and negative happens, you really feel it. You just kind of crash. It's a really bad feeling. And he came back in and tried to sit down and sort of talk a little bit with people, and it was really awkward. And most of us were getting up and leaving and stuff at that point, nicely, because it was just a small group.
Right.
So I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't believe that. It really crushed me quite a bit, because I couldn't believe that he could get that negative and angry about something. I thought, oh, he's always this nice level guy, but of course he's a human being and he has his ups and downs like everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're at his place. Sid's by the fire. Seven or eight people there. What's the format?
There's no format. He doesn't have a format. They'd usually make tea for everybody, or Mary would, and we'd all have our cup of tea or something. And Sid would sit down on a couple of cushions. Usually, for some reason, he's on the floor and we're all on couches and stuff. And it's a pretty small room. And he would just start to talk. He'd say, in his brogue sort of thing, the other day, Barb and I were just out on the front porch there and looking out at the ocean and thinking, I looked at her and I said, Barb, isn't this paradise we're in right now? How could anybody be in this paradise? And he would just sort of start with some little thing like that, and it would just start to go with, so many times people don't see that because their mind is going all the time. You've got to get rid of the mind, lose the mind, and go to that inner consciousness and just let it be and take in. He said, you can have one person walking down the road. The other day, somebody walking down the road with me, and they were going, look at all this dog poo or something like that. And he said, and we're walking along and we're going, I don't know what that was. He says, we walk along and we look up the fence and there's these beautiful roses growing on the fence and hanging over the fence. So he said, this is like life. You can walk along and look at the dog poo and be depressed, or you can look at the roses and feel the beauty of life and feel happy. So that's how he would sort of start his little stories and go into these things. I probably can't even, of course, I can't repeat it exactly like he would say it, but
of course.
If I could, I'd be doing a different job.
True enough, True enough. So you stopped, your regular contact with Sid in the mid '80s. You said, is there anything that you miss about him?
Oh, I still wish he was just here one more time, and I could go and listen and really appreciate what a gift that was, that I could sit there and listen to somebody like that. But yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Well, one of the things that Linda and I were talking about was the way that Sid used to talk at the beginning, when he would use, I think he got more afraid of using certain words later on, like I said, because of the universities and that sort of thing.
Right.
But how those first things he was saying were so pure. Right. He would just make these statements here and there throughout his speech, and it was just a pure thing. If you look at those early papers, that's where you see it.
In your estimation, was he legitimately enlightened?
Well, I think he was. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've seen people that have tried to fake it, and
right.
I know what that looks like, and he has too. I mean, he was speaking at Beaver Point Hall here one time. It was one of the really big groups and big gatherings that he did, and this guy came that was supposed to be like a high up yoga guy or something, and he had on by this time Sid was dressing a little like normal. Right. But this guy had on the whole yoga, white, everything outfit, and all this stuff. And Sid started to talk. And when Sid talked, you got so calm and so mesmerized and so open, kind of. If somebody came in and said something negative or brought something negative, it just cut you to the core because you were so open and not ready. You didn't have any defenses up.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's interesting. Right.
I think is what it is. And so this guy started arguing with him right in the middle of Sid speaking. And Sid just stopped what he was saying, and he talked to the guy. And I remember he didn't get angry with them, but he said, sitting, and that's when he said, sitting and staring at your belly button for 12 hours a day will not get you to a new place.
Right.
You can't put anything in a cup that's full. You have to share because you have to have room for more to come in. If you share, more will come in just by the act of sharing what you know. And so for me, it wasn't always like preaching the word, but it was just the way I could act in my life and be with my children and family and other people.
Right. So we're back sort of again to the idea of taking that grain or whatever it is and going out and living it. And by living it, you're actually experiencing it more. And then by that sharing or enabling yourself to go deeper into it. But just, it sounds to me like that's a natural course of action rather than a practice that someone who meditates might do, or someone that does yoga might do, where they're actively working at it.
Yeah. He doesn't ever say that something is totally wrong to do. And some people might find that by doing meditation and that kind of thing, in some ways, they can get their mind to quiet down and hear more of their soul. And that's not bad. But he's just saying if that's all that you're doing and you're not sharing not just words, but your love, your actions, things you can do, sort of what you're doing, is that you're trying to bring out more of these teachings and these thoughts for people in a world that's, wants to go to war or something like that. That's part of it. And I'm sure so when you have done that you get more of a feeling of fulfillment. And that's what he's talking about, I think.
Yeah, that's I like that a lot. Actually that's food for thought for me as well. Because there's no agenda with me for this. Like it just sort of the whole book club kind of came on the spur of a moment. It was like, hey, I gotta start a book club, and then I'll get some of the authors on, and that'll be cool because I'll get to talk to them and I'll get to hear more about this stuff, and then slowly it's sort of, not that it's evolved into anything significant, but little by little, from from one experience, and then I've met Linda now, and through Linda I've met, or we'll be talking to David, and through those I've met you. So it's pretty neat what happens when you kind of get out of the way and let stuff happen.
Yeah.
It's
because when computers first started really getting used and becoming more like personal computers, like in the 80s actually, and that, like Sid said, somebody was saying, well, what do you think of all of this now with computers? We can share so much. And he said, well, one of the problems is now the world can not just share all of its bullshit, it can keep all of its bullshit. Instead of having it be spoken and leave or written and burned up, it's now going to be forever on the out in the airwaves. And so I was like, oh, but I'm loving this new computer thing. But he could see something that I couldn't see at that time.
Isn't that?
But it's pretty true.
Yeah. Well, I'm just like, I'm like, little tears going here. I mean, that is, yeah, there's a permanence to it, isn't there?
Yes. And if you can use it for a way that's counteracting that somewhat, at least it's a little step in the right direction, right?
So do you think that, do you think that we can add and subtract to a greater consciousness? Like, do you think there is a greater human consciousness or energy? And do you think we can as individuals give into that or take from, what am I trying to say here? Do you think that as individuals we can add and subtract to our overall global consciousness with individual actions? I'm not getting the question quite right, Sheri.
I understand what you're saying, and I think totally we can. I think when you see that this one little man who was a pulp mill worker, who was having problems in his marriage and everything else going on, smoking away and at the pub and everything.
Right.
And then he had that experience, and he moved to Saltspring after he had that experience.
Right.
And came to this little island that had about 4,000 people living on it at that time.
Right.
And nobody came over here much, a few tourists. And he brought all those people, we right now could have this 60,000 people here if Sid had kept on being here and people had kept on thinking they had to come and see him.
Right.
So he made changes in so many lives, and he certainly made a huge change in my life. I mean, my marriage was so much better because of having those realizations, both my husband and I. He eventually did come to meetings as well.
Right.
And my children too, they learned a lot. My little boy, my son, who's now in his 50s,
right.
But he was, there's a video of when we were all at Seebeck, and at the end of the video, the guy just caught these kids that were playing on the rope swing, and my son is swinging on the rope swing, and the guy says, well, do you know what God is? And my son swings towards the camera up close, and he says, I am God. And that's how they ended that video. And I wish I knew where that video was, because it was a great, great video.
What a moment.
But so even the children, like, nobody was preaching to them. He didn't come and listen to Sid with me or anything, but just by being around all these people that were at this sort of convention thing or whatever you call it there, he picked up on, and what he was hearing at home, I guess this is what he picked up on. Well, I'm God. If God is in me and in everything, that I am God too. But it was a really sweet moment with this little blonde, cute little face coming out and saying, I am God.
How old would your son have been at that time?
He was about 9.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
He was small for his age, little tiny guy, but yeah.
Oh, very, very cool. What was I picture Sid as being very kid friendly.
Well, he was such a gentle being. He was very gentle, and he would get to know things about the kids, and that he didn't gush over them or anything like that. They would just kind of be there, and they would be treated like everybody else. But a lot of times, of course, when we went to listen to Sid, we didn't usually bring a lot of little kids in that, because it would be
of course.
But we would have a Christmas party every year, gathering, and Bill would be Santa, Linda's Bill, he would be Santa. I've got all these pictures of my kid sitting on his knee in his Santa outfit.
Ah, cool.
We'd get together and do fun things and have potlucks and things like that Sid would be at, and he would get to meet the kids and see the kids. But
how did you I'm jumping all over the place sort of as questions are popping into my mind, but how was so you were there pretty close to his enlightenment experience.
Yeah, I don't know the date of that, but
yeah, I don't know that. I don't have the date. I mean, I'll get it from David when we chat. But what change in Sid did you see from the time that you met him to say 10 years later? How did it evolve or change in any way, if it did?
well, I know when I saw him after his wife had died, he was really sad, and he was, not in a really good place.
Right.
And I think that's normal. He loved her very much. And what it told me is that it's just human. Like, you had sad things that happen in your life.
Right.
And what I could never take was the people in the group that pretended I shouldn't say they pretended, but they seemed to be always happy, and
Right.
they over gushed at things. And I remember one time we were somewhere, and Sid was with us, and the women said, "Oh, I was looking at my window and at this lace curtain, and there was this fly there buzzing, and I was watching this fly buzzing around, and I just felt so close to the energy of life and the spirit of," and Sid just interrupted her at that point with this really harsh voice that would have scared the heck out of me, and said, I won't say her name, but he said, "So-and-so, flies are just swat." And that was it. And the whole room got completely quiet, and this poor person was embarrassed, of course, but
Right.
he just couldn't take it. And I thought, oh, I feel like that quite often. And thanks, Sid, for showing me that not just me, that you don't have to be this phony person that's like, hello, I can't even do it, but I could do it probably, but you know what I mean? So he wanted us to just be genuine people.
Right.
And if you have a time when you're going through grief, go through grief and know that, he always said there's no such thing as death.
Right.
And I never knew what that meant, but I feel like he knew enough.
I'm sorry, Linda, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What does that mean to you now? Or does it?
Well, I think of that when I do lose people. I've lost a daughter, I've lost a grandchild.
Sorry to hear that.
And I think of that, and when my grandchild died, he was only 2 years old, and he had a seizure and died in his sleep. And I was doing my social work practicum in Kelowna, and I was so devastated. I was driving across this bridge on my way to my practicum, and I started crying, and I couldn't stop. And as I just got across the bridge, there was a great big church there. So I just drove into the parking lot of the church because I couldn't really drive like that. And I went around to a side door, and I was sobbing, and the secretary let me in, and she said, "Well, there's no minister here or anything now." I said, I think I need to talk to somebody. And she said, "Come with me." And she took me into the front of the church where the choir sits, and sat me on a pew in this beautiful church with all these stained glass windows and just such a sanctuary place. And she said, "I just want to show you something." And she took this piece of embroidery out, and she held it up to me, and she said, "Look at this." And it's the back of the embroidery. It's all knots and it's threads going every which way, and everything is this total mess, right? She said, "Look at this. This is where we are." She said, "We don't understand. You see this? It's a tangled up mess. Can you figure out what that is?"
Right.
And I said, "No." And she turned it over, and it was this beautiful embroidery of these blue birds in the sky and clouds and beautiful trees and flowers, gorgeous embroidery. And she said, "This is where your grandson is." And she said, "We don't understand what this side is, and we don't understand what this side is." Where he is. And so I don't really profess to understand that when Sid says that, but I believe him.
That's pretty cool. That's a pretty neat story. And I love the metaphor. I mean, yeah, take an embroidery. Whether you understand the one side or not, you flip it over, you certainly don't understand the other side.
No.
That's pretty cool.
And it's just beautiful. And it just helped me so much. And so when Sid would say, you can hear something anywhere,
Right.
you can even hear it in church, obviously.
Sorry, that's very funny. So within the dogma, you might still pick something up, eh?
Yes.
What one of the stories out there is that Sid didn't read a lot. So my parents are both European. I think I have a decent idea of what a grade 9 education coming out of Scotland looks like.
Yeah.
And I think it's different than what we attribute to a grade 9 education here in Canada now.
Yes.
Significantly different. What did he? It's not even what he read. What did Sid do? What was he doing when he wasn't doing the principles?
Well, they did a lot of things. He did a lot of things with Barb. They went swimming. She had the flu one time, so he took her over to the pool in Duncan to go swimming because he thought she should have a good experience instead of feeling the flu.
Right.
And that kind of amazed me. I know he wrote books,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty sure he read books. They had books in their house. I mean, he would always exaggerate this whole thing of how he was this uneducated steelworker guy. Right. And I think what he wanted to do was say, look, at anybody can have this experience. You right. don't have to be a highly educated person that reads a million books. You don't have to be on a journey for spiritualism, because he wasn't. Right. It can happen to anybody at any place. And I think that was his point, more than that he didn't come across as an uneducated man. He knew a lot of things about a lot of things, and he could speak right off the top of his head for like 2 hours without stopping. Right. And he just had to relax and let it come through him. He said he right. couldn't. If his mind got in the way, he'd get off topic, like mine does.
Well, for those of us that have not had the full enlightenment experience,
yes.
That's happening, isn't it? Is there anything? Is there anything that you wish people could have seen about Sid or of Sid that maybe they didn't? So is there anything that, and again, I'm not looking to throw anyone under a bus or anything like that, but is there any experience that you had of Sid that you wish people knew about?
Well, I don't know what other people saw, like what you could all hear the same thing and you could all get a different experience. We had people that walked away and said BS or whatever, that were, you could see they were pretty well into their own ego and didn't want to let anything in. Right. Because it couldn't hurt you to let it in and to hear it. And I'm not sure I would from every, I haven't gone to listen to anybody else. Right. So I don't know what other experience I might get from that. But I don't know, his everyday life, he loved his cup of coffee. He loved to go to Hawaii. They spent a lot of time in Hawaii. Right. We went to Hawaii and we met up with them there, and just for a breakfast, and everybody started going to Hawaii because Sid and Barb went to Hawaii. So there must be some, it was Maui. Right. And Pam and Jim moved to Maui and spent a few years there teaching and stuff. And he loved to walk on the beach. He loved nature. He loved to look at nature. He loved to eat. He loved other people around. He loved people around him and people that he could visit with. I know that back in the day, that he smoked dope a bit with other people, and I think he dropped acid a few times. But right. We had all done that, so it was like, oh yeah, well, that was not something I enjoyed, but it always made me unfortunately, it makes me nauseous. Right. I
Well,
couldn't have fun with. I couldn't have any fun.
we
But
we might
he
have
was
to. Go ahead.
perfect. He was perfect. He didn't walk some perfect line that he thought was some religious Christian way to be or something. Or
Right.
he just enjoyed life, and he enjoyed hearing stories. He enjoyed people. Like anywhere he would run into you. And he seemed to have that magic way of just appearing here and there in my life, like in Nanaimo, in Victoria, on
Right.
Saltspring. When he wasn't on Saltspring, he was actually supposed to be in New York or somewhere. He was, he'd be back visiting someone, I guess, and then there he'd be on the street and bringing me little presents and books. And I was just one person that, of all of these people, I don't know how many he still did all of what he was doing in the States, working with universities and stuff. And there's a good book out by, well, it came out a few years ago. I don't know if you've read it, but it's by a couple of the psychiatrist guys that he worked with, called Sanity, Insanity, and Common Sense. Have
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. It's Roger Mills and
Roger Mills, yeah.
I think
And
Roger Mills is the primary author on that. Yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. And that book, I'm not sure, I think Sid gave me that book. Somebody gave me that book when I was doing social work. And so that was incredibly amazing for the work I was doing, because everybody gets labeled.
Right.
And once you're labeled, that's what you are. Oh, I'm a schizophrenic, or I'm a whatever. And then you can't get out of that because that's your label.
Right.
And so it's all about, no, that's not, you don't have to have a label. You can just see the person, and who's this person, and what do they need, and how can you help them, and what can you give them.
Well, and that's actually sort of leads me into a question here, which I mean, you alluded to the fact that with your parenting and in the schools, it was helpful, sort of being exposed to the understanding that Sid exposed you to. How is it helpful? What like, it's not a tool that you can give someone. So how is it? How did it enable you to do a better job? Let's say I'm just struggling with the language a little bit here.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was better, but
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Well, rather than seeing a child, for example, if you're at school, one child gets designated sort of as the bully, or as the problem, or as acting out, or as the very introverted and too quiet. And people build on that because they now see that is what that child is. They treat them in a certain way that makes them stay in that category, or makes them feel guilty about that category, or whatever it is. And so by just treating them as a person that has all kinds of emotions and feelings and things going on, if you can get through all of that and show them where they have their talents and their abilities, and where they are where God is in them, but you don't use that language. Like, you can't go to, like I said to Sid, I can't go to school and start saying to children, God is in you and God is in everyone, because their parents are going to say, wait a minute, we don't, we have this different belief. It sounds too much like a religion. And I think that's why he got away from some of that language later. It was because he went into more psychological language. And that was just because even saying the word God or saying the word Jesus, like, he talked about Jesus and certain things about Jesus, because to him, Jesus was just another enlightened man. Like him.
Exactly.
Have come many enlightened men that have come our way over generations and centuries, that have had some sort of experience. So he didn't believe that, that a virgin had a baby in a manger necessarily, but the spirit of what Jesus was, or what any of these enlightened people are. And so that's in all those children that you see. And when you see that, instead of seeing what they're presenting, you treat them differently, and everything is different. And, I still have kids come and talk to me that are now in their 50s and that say, because of you, I did this or I did that. And that was just from when I was working in the school. Like, you saw my artistic ability, and you were the only one that helped me see this was a great talent that I had. And now I'm an art teacher, and I'm and it's really amazing. And I'm not saying I was perfect or anything at any of this time, but I'm just saying it made me that much better at what I was doing.
That's very, very cool. Um, I could go on, but I try to keep these around an hour, and I know,
Yeah.
it's just the time just kind of flies by. I looked at the clock and it was 5 after. Now it's almost 5:02, right?
Yeah.
Um, ah, we started this very much impromptu, and normally I like to have a few minutes to get an idea of what I'm going to maybe ask. But is
Yeah.
so is there any? And it's great. I mean, the conversation flows even better this way. Is there anything? Let's say we've got 5 minutes, Sheri. Is there
Okay.
anything that you would love to share? Is there anything that you would want people to know about Sid or about your experience with Sid?
Well, to me, Sid was the real deal.
Right.
He was a genuinely a person who had an experience. I don't know what the degrees of enlightenment are, or who's higher and who's lower and all that stuff, and it doesn't matter to me. I just wish everybody had had the chance to actually be there in the room with them and just listen to him even one time, because it's not really something you can describe. But once you can go into that place in yourself, then you know how to get there to some degree, even when you're in those moments of, like I say, grief or whatever it is, where you know inside of yourself that everything's okay.
That's brilliant. That's a perfect spot to end, Linda. Once you know what's inside yourself, you kind of know how to get there.
Yeah.
That sentiment is beautiful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop our recording.
Okay.
Uh,